Let me record, because that would be bad if we forgot to record. Three incredible women here. I am just meeting Stephanie. I know Autumn from being on her podcast and from last year's summit, and Angela and I go way back. We're BFFs. So BFFs who've never met in person, right? And only talk once a year for the summit, but I'm just kidding. She's has been a great contributor since we started doing these things. So I'm glad to have you back. Today, we are going to talk about writing fantasy novels and everything that comes up around that topic. Last year, we had a lot more people interested in the topic of writing and marketing fantasy novels. So we wanted to do this special roundtable a little bit separate from the main conference so that we could dig into it and get more eyes on this particular topic. So this is not my area of expertise, so I already told these ladies I'm just going to ask some questions and then let them take it from there. So first thing we're going to do is allow all three of them to introduce themselves and tell you all the good things about who they are, why they write fantasy, when they started, etc. And we'll start with Angela.
Yeah, so I'm Angela J. Ford. I write epic fantasy and more recently fairy tale, fantasy romance. And I started writing when I was 12 years old just because I read a lot of books and I would just get ideas for, ooh, like what if the plot went this way? Or what if there was a twist here? Or what if this person, instead of being like this great hero, they were actually evil? So anyway, I like the kind of the twists and the turns of the plot. And one of the reasons I really chose fantasy is because I tried writing like dystopian romances or like urban fantasy or like anything that was happening in the real world. And I realized that when you're writing something that takes place in the world as we know it, there is a certain amount of research that you have to do. It's not massive or anything, but you still have to do research. Like you want to get the names of like brands and businesses right, and you want to get the streets right, especially if you're writing something that takes place in, for example, I live in the United States in Tennessee. And so writing something in Nashville would work for me because it's something that I can go to these different locations and places. But I realized that wasn't something that I wanted to do. I just wanted to make things up. I didn't want any limitations. And so that's really why I chose to write fantasy. And so I published my very first novel in 2015. And it's been a whole like whirlwind ever since. I feel like it's an addiction. I just can't stop writing. And I have all these ideas that keep popping up. And it's just been a lot of fun. And I feel like if you aspire to be a writer and you aspire to write fantasy, it's really good to just surround yourself with the right people and then just stay consistent and keep going, because that's what really helps make all those books turn out. So that's me.
I am so sorry. Like right after you started talking, the yard crew showed up. So just excuse me if there's like noises in the background. I'll keep myself muted here right outside my window. That's so awesome. I've really enjoyed following your progression as well. I came in to your world, I think, when you had just published your first book, and then watched in shock and awe as you like pumped out these enormous books one after the other. It was like, holy smokes. So it's very exciting. I'm glad to see how you're moving forward with that. All right, Autumn, you're up.
Oh, so that's a rough one to follow up with. I've known Angela for a few years now, but she's a brilliant writer, so I love being on this panel. But thank you. So I've been writing, like Angela, I know I was a huge fantasy reader when I was in high school. I remember it was an Anne McCaffrey short story on dragon impression in Pern, and I found that in my library, and that was it. Fantasy forever, huge fan. And I did write stories, but I was also a graphic artist. I was an artist for ages. Since I was 3, I wanted to be a painter. So that was sort of my focus for years. And it wasn't until my husband found a note I had in the back of my college books where I'd been writing. And he's like, "You wrote this?" So yeah, he's definitely part of the reason I started writing seriously. Wrote for probably almost 8 years, taking some courses as well to catch up despite my English degree. It, it helps to get your feet wet again after you've been out of it for a while. And when I did that, I finally published my debut novel in 2012, and that was epic fantasy because, yeah, like Angela, fantasy has been my heart and soul since I found my first dragon, and that has never looked back. I do write some in the real world. The series I'm writing now, which is my fourth series, is more urban fantasy with a little bit of romance, and that'll be out in early 2021. And those books will make my 21st, 22nd, and 23rd published novels. I also am writing my fifth series, which is more true dark fantasy, epic fantasy set in an entirely different world. And that should hopefully be being published towards the end of 2016 as well. Or 2016, yeah, I wish. Wish we could roll back the clock to 2021. So yeah, we're in 2021, but yeah, that'll 2021 will be a
still
big year.
2020. As
Oh,
much
I
as
know,
we wish
but
it was 2021.
I know. I am just focused on all these plans for 2021. I'm just skipping the next 2 months, and that's just the way it's going to go.
Well,
So
no kidding.
No, yeah. So I have a little bit dystopian. I have a little bit of epic fantasy, mostly epic fantasy, some nonfiction as well. My husband and I do a lot of crazy adventures, from living in a yurt in Maine in winter to traveling 100,000 miles in 4 years. You know, everyone does that, right? So we write some stories about that as well. And I also do run, like Alexa mentioned, the Am Writing Fantasy podcast and website and some courses on there. So we've been helping authors start out and answer questions. I just seem to gravitate towards new authors because it's so exciting to help someone publish their first novel. I think it gives you the same chills as when you publish your first one. So I love seeing that happen and helping authors on that journey.
Well, I'm going to ask this question later, but that the question after listening to the two of you right there makes me that I want to not forget to ask is this idea of how, one, you write that many books, because I'm like struggling to write a 50,000 word novel. So like, how on earth? But two, like any tips that you have, and I'm just putting a pin in this for later because I want to introduce Stephanie, but tips you have for actually making a living so that you can write that many books. Because part of the problem is, I think, with a lot of authors is that we're struggling to balance a full-time job or other things and be able to earn enough money so that we can stop some of those things to write. So that's something I'd really love to dig into later. But first, let's introduce Stephanie. So excited to meet you.
Hey y'all, so I am Stephanie Bwabwa, and I write young adult epic fantasy. Stories for me started as well, like Angela and Autumn. When I was a kid, I just loved to read. Actually, so funny thing is, I hated reading, but then my mother bought me Roald Dahl books. So like The Witches and all of that, and that was it. Like I was done, couldn't stop reading. I was the kid with the little book inside their like textbook at school who would like get in trouble because she was reading instead of working. So that was me. I loved Series of Unfortunate Events, and that really got me on my way. But I actually didn't start writing that young. I used to do more poetry, but nothing too serious. It wasn't until actually after high school when I started writing just for myself and like writing all of the ideas that were in my head, because I've always had a wild imagination. I've been a fantasy reader since middle school. So I always loved the story, especially Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instruments series. That was like what did it for me. And I devoured anything fantasy since then. And so like after high school, I just started writing what was in my head. I wanted to like put something out there. I had this world in my brain. And that's when it finally kicked off. That was 2013. Gosh, time flies. And so that's when I actually started writing for publish. I didn't actually start publishing from this world until this year, which, you know, despite everything going on in 2020, boom, like something awesome, right? So that's a really fun thing. But yeah, I write about angels, and I liken my world as Narnia meets Wakanda about Black angels. That's like what I write about. I absolutely love it. I was raised in a Christian home. So like the first thing you're taught about is angels and demons, right? So like I've always been obsessed with it, like just like the supernatural realm. And so just taking the time to dive into like different hierarchies, what they look like, what they do, you know, like what they're all passionate about. Like that's what I'm really into. So that's just a lot of fun. So that's what I focus on, epic fantasy fantasy for young adults, especially. I would love, I tried the dystopian thing. That did not work out. Like, I realized I love to read it, but writing it is something completely different. That is not my lane, so I'm not driving there. But yeah, so that's what I've been doing. And then also, of course, Angela and I, we work with indie authors and just helping them write their books, market them, publish them. So that's been a joy as well, just helping. As Autumn said, like when writers are in that newbie stage and they're like, what do I do? I want to get my book published, and just, experiencing that and helping them get to that place. That is just super awesome. That's also my jam.
Trying to unmute myself there. Okay, so I have so many questions. I don't even know how we're going to cover them all in 45 minutes, but we'll just get to it. We may have to do a part 2 of this panel later on down the road or something. I do want to say to everybody who's here with us live, and if you're watching us on Facebook, feel free to ask questions. My team is watching the comments on the Facebook stream, and we'll pop those in here for us. And I'm sure these ladies would love to answer your questions. But first, I have a question that's kind of to all of you, and you've all mentioned that you started writing, or this came about from a young age, and I'm really passionate about, obviously, showing support to women, but it starts with raising up little girls who are empowered too, right? So I'd like to start with kind of a touchy-feely question, and that is if you have any advice for young girls who want to be fantasy authors, how would you encourage them to get started in today's world? And Stephanie, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, no. So the first thing I would say is just read everything you can get your hands on. I think that's what did it for me, was the fact that I wanted to write these stories because I loved reading them. And then I reached a place where I was no longer finding the story that I wanted to read. I wanted to read more about angels. I wanted to read, just to be candid, I wanted to read about characters that looked like me, characters that had my kind of background, or who physically, looked like me and had my experiences. And so I would say, especially now, I mean, there's so much literature out there. Like, there's so many books. And the thing is, like, now in our climate, there are a lot of stories where little girls now can find themselves in stories. They can find their background, they can find their family, they can find, the kind of principles that they were raised with, and also the individuals they strive to be. They can find themselves in these stories now. So the first thing I would say is just, don't be afraid to just dive in. And you don't only have to read fantasy. Honestly, reading a lot of different genres also just amplifies what you learn and what you know in fantasy. So that would be the first thing I would say, is just to gobble up everything you can and just read and expose yourself to different stories, different types of lives, different perspectives, so that it can make yours more well-rounded, and also build your creative wealth for when you get ready to start writing.
I think that's awesome. And it's really funny that that's where you started, because I was playing back and forth between the first question being, how important is it to read other fantasy books? And then I wanted to ask the question about the girls. So you answered 2 in 1. Awesome. All right, Autumn, what are your tips?
I would definitely agree with Stephanie. Reading is important. And it's funny because I'm going way back now. But when I was reading and growing up, I grew up in a rural section of Pennsylvania. My neighbors were Amish, so very, very rural. And I was a tomboy, and all the stories everyone was pushing on me were, the princess ones. And I was a tomboy. I wanted to go fight dragons or ride horses. I wanted to be the heroine of the adventure. And I think that is definitely what drove me to reading and then eventually writing and just questioning. I think that is the important thing. And one of the best things you can do is read a story. And if there's something you don't like, or it didn't go where you wanted it to, what would you have done differently? What question do you want to solve? I wanted more magic in my world. I wanted to be the heroine. I wanted to see women who were out there doing things. And that is definitely what I write and what I strive to do and strive to bring to the next generation. So happily, things have changed a lot since I was a young girl, which is exciting. But finding those questions, finding those things that you're missing in your life or that you want to see solved, I think that's a wonderful way of taking on a new topic and seeing a problem in the world, put it in a fantasy setting, put some characters to it, and solve it and see where it goes.
I love that so much. And the more authors that I meet, the more I realize that so many of us write for these types of reasons, for creating the characters that look like us, for solving the problems we wanted to solve, for creating the adventure that we wanted to have. So it's so exciting. I'm getting emotional. All right, Angela, your turn.
Yeah, so growing up, I have four sisters, and we were also all homeschooled. And I think having that combination really helped me with being creative because we had a lot of downtime. Like homeschooling, we didn't spend like hours and hours doing schoolwork because we didn't have to. And so we would have our mornings and do our school, and then we'd have the afternoons just to play. And me and my sisters, we played hard. Like we would make up these elaborate stories. We would destroy rooms with like our creations, like here's an island, here's the ship, here are the people that are going off to fight. And so I think that's where my love of storytelling really came from. And that, and also what I would really encourage young writers to do is just to journal. I started journaling when I was like 6 years old. And of course, it was ridiculous. But there's something about practicing and just writing down whatever's on your mind and just putting it down without a filter, without editing yourself, just getting into that practice of just getting it down on paper. And I think that's really helpful because later on, when you start writing, you already have that mentality. Okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. And I think I spent probably about 10 years where I journaled almost every single day. There were a couple of days I missed, but it was like almost every single day. And sometimes it would just be like an iteration of like, this is what I did today, pretty boring stuff. And sometimes it'd be really exciting, like if I were traveling. But it was always something that I wrote down, whether it was one sentence or like pages and pages, it was every single day. I think that really helped you get in the moment because you're taking your thoughts and you're writing them down. And that really helps you to become a writer. So that would be my suggestion.
I love that. And you know what? It just kind of sparked an idea in me too. I think that I was a journaler too from the time I could start writing. And my dad bought me my first diary when I was in third or fourth grade. And looking back on it is so funny, but also because I am feeling compelled to write about younger, more YA, more younger type characters. Like I love looking back and reading it like what my mindset was at 10, 11, 12. Because I mean, even though I have a 10-year-old daughter, like I still can't quite get there. So having those long-term journals is really great because I can look back and I can be like, oh yeah, I remember when I used to think like that, when I really did believe in magic, when I was at my best, most innocent, wonderful self, So, oh my gosh. Okay. We have a great question that Sarah just posted. So she says, she wants to know how you take an idea into a fully realized world. So she says, I'm sure it's different for every author, but she wants to hear about this. Do you map it all out? Do you tweak it as you go? Are you planners? Are you plotters? Are you pantsers? Let's dish it out. We'll start with Autumn this time.
Oh, you give me the hard one. I see how it is. That's a fantastic question. I think everyone eventually has to find their own groove and works for them. For me, I am a hybrid. I'm so excited to write that I tend to write a little bit before I really need to get going, and I then have to back up and do some world building. But I'm learning. I have a good writing partner, Jesper Schmidt, so we write together. I write on my own, and I also write with him, and he's definitely more of a plotter. And to write with someone else, you definitely need to be able to communicate, and so you end up plotting quite a bit. And we've developed some techniques to really take world building, but to see the world building only to create what you need to create the story. So you're creating both at the same time, developing only what you need to make the story come to life, to fit the story, fit the situation, and fit the world. And by doing that first, you come up with a world that is so amazing and so unique and so alive, and a story that fits that world and could not exist anywhere else as well as it does in that world. And so you're developing both together, and I'm doing good, and I'm doing that now with all my stories and taking the time to do it faster than he usually does. But I definitely have a shortcut method where I write out everything and I develop it all in Scrivener, and then I get to writing. And by doing that, having that outline, to answer your question that's coming later, that helps. Having that really helps. I mean, I'm writing out at least a 90,000, 100,000 words in 2 months, usually 2.5 months max, to finish a story and move on to the next one and to continue a series.
That's incredible. I'm going to go to Angela next because I want you to answer the question first for people who are brand new to fantasy and may not even know what this world building means. Like, can you, and you doing a lot of world building in your stuff. So can you first explain that and then dig into that question?
Yeah, totally. So for me, world building is really what is the land like? Who's in power, what is the magic system like, what are the everyday lives of the people, just everything that comes into play when it comes to a world. Like when you wake up in the morning, what kind of bed are you sleeping on, what kind of roof is over your head, is there even one, how do people travel, just everything that comes into play when it comes to building the structure of a world. And also one of the things that I really like is just the different races or species that live in that world and what their powers are. And I've always been fascinated with that. I've been fascinated with fairies. And so I wanted to create something very similar. And so I would say for my first series, it was birthed it when I was 12. So I spent like over 10 years just kind of like sitting and living in that world and thinking about it, even though I wasn't actively writing in it. And that was really cool because there's a lot of like lore and history. I made like a ridiculous timeline that covers like 3,000 years. And I don't think that kind of stuff is necessary when you're writing your first book. I think it's helpful and it's fun and it's just something to do to get your creative juices flowing. But I would recommend for people starting out and really hoping to dig into fantasy, I would highly recommend studying story structure. And I think this is really important because you have to know what will make a reader excited about the book, what parts need to be there. And then also studying the story structure will really help you when you're struggling with your book and trying to figure out what happens next. When I first started writing, I didn't study story structure at all. All I did was read and kind of intuitively take what I found in books, which happened to be story structure, and kind of follow that guideline as I just pantsed my way through my books, which is fine. But then I always found I was getting to a part of my stories where I would be absolutely stuck. And I remember one year I had writer's block and I could not write for a year. It was awful. And I finally discovered this because I didn't know story structure. And once I studied it, I was able to move forward. And so now my method when I'm writing, I still am a lot of a pantser. I still like to just like take an ideal and a character and a scene and just go. But I also know that I can't just write an entire novel like that. I really need to sit down and also know, like, I have this character. Where do I want her to go next? Where do I want her to be at the end of the chapter? And so instead of plotting out an entire novel, because I get really bored when I do that, and I never follow that anyway, I usually tend to plot out my chapters. So chapter by chapter. And this is kind of like what's called scene structure. And so I'll take it, I'll be like, this is my character. What are their goals in this scene? What is going to happen? How are the internal or external things around them going to affect them positively or negatively? And then at the end of the chapter, what kind of conflict will arise and how would they work to resolve that? And so that really helps me move forward. And so instead of being really stuck when I write, I'm able to write a lot faster. And then that also means that once I finish a novel, I tend to spend more time going through it and editing and fixing the things because I don't know it all up front. I tend to know like in the moment, or I'll have an idea while I'm sleeping, or I have an idea when I'm reading another book, or when I'm doing my morning workout. So I usually tend to have to go back and spend more time on the back end. And I think if you're a plotter, you're going to spend more time on the front end and less time on the back end once you get done, just because you will have a more solid idea of where your story is going.
That was fantastic advice. For the newbies in the crowd, you'll hear authors often use these two terms, pantser and plotter. So a pantser is somebody, it came from the term fly by the seat of your pants. You literally just sit down and you write, you just free flow write. And then a plotter is someone who's going to spend a little bit more time plotting out the story and what's going to happen. And I think people often start off as one or the other and then wind up to be a blend of the two as you get going. I'm totally a pantser and it never works out well for me. So I need to start plotting a little bit more. So, all right, Stephanie.
That is hilarious. No, I just a little, funny before I start. So I tried the pantsing thing. I was like, oh, I can do this, especially because, Angela and I also go way back. And I was like, well, Angela does it all the time and she's fine. Like, look how many books she published. So I can do it too. Guys, failed. Like, I cannot pants to save my life. So I am a plotter. I sometimes pants just a little bit, like just so I don't like restrict myself all the time, but I do like to get everything done up front. For me, I love that Angela brought up story structure because I really go by story structure, specifically 3-act structure. I know like there are different structures out there that are better for writers, and figure out which one is best for you. Never put yourself in a box. But I know for me, what works really well is 3-act story structure. And typically for me, when I'm diving into a world, because everything I do is it's completely different world, these characters are totally made up, like everything is made up. And so because of that, I need to know a lot of information up front, or else readers won't be able to keep up with what it is I'm putting out there. It won't make sense to them. And so there does come that sense of like adding just a little bit of realism into it while keeping everything supernatural. But for me, it all breaks down to my characters and the world. And so like what I see an individual first, sometimes it's their face, sometimes it's their personality, sometimes it's them in the middle of doing something, whether they're running from something, or I see kind of like from the plot end where I'm like, oh, okay, they're going to end up doing this by the end of this long game. So this is where they need to start. And I will go from there and build them out. And then I will think of the world that they need to be into. Like Angela was saying, where do you wake up? Where do you walk down the street to go to school every day? Where do you shop? Who's around you? Who raised you, and what kind of mindset and mentality that you have. Typically, especially my stories, I like to start off like in the middle of something. And so doing that, I like to dive into backstory, which really helps me build out the characters and thereby the world. And so I'll think of like, okay, were you dropped off as a kid and left alone, years prior? Were you raised in a rough neighborhood? Were you raised with privilege? And so, you think like everything should be seated at your feet. Like I'll go through these different parts of the character. And then as I do that, I can see like the world slowly unveils in my mind, who's in charge as far as like politics wise, because of course that trickles down to how schools are set up, what kind of like religion is around there. Do you have any beliefs? That also helps me build out the world. And then I'll go through my structure. And so with 3-act, what I tend to do typically is first I'll get my premise for the story, and then once I have that, I will go ahead and have the main thing that happens in each act, right? So the first act, then this came out for those who don't know, what's a 3-act structure, like why that came about. That just came about because that's what movies use, like in film. And so if you really pay attention, if you watch a lot of film, you can tell when like something major happens and then it shifts to a different part, and then it shifts to a different part, and the movie's done. And that also what goes back to way back in like Shakespearean time, when they would watch like plays in theater, and the first portion of the play would be done, the curtain would come down, they would switch scenes, they would go on, curtain would come down, and then they would switch scenes, and then the play would be over. And so I typically write that way because those like that kind of structure really does help you to know when a character needs to pivot and what they need to do. And so I will get my premise for the story, like my big, what is this character trying to do in this story? What do they need to learn, or what do they need to accomplish? And then for the first act, I'll be like, okay, well, this might could happen in this act. Act 2, this might could happen. Act 3, this might could happen, to finish it off. Whether I leave it off on a cliffhanger, which means that I leave you with a brand new question, and so now you have to wait to the next book until I answer that question, or I completely wrap up everything. I answer all of the questions that I caused throughout the story by the end of the book. And then in each act, what I will do is, so with 3-act structure, it's basically broken down into 10 parts. The first one is 3, the last one is 3, and then the remaining are in the middle. And that's great for me because when especially in my panting days years ago, my books would die in the middle. Like I would have a strong beginning, I would have a strong end. Child, I did not know what to do for the middle. Your girl was lost. And so that's really why I like married myself to 3-act story structure, so that that does not happen anymore. I don't get to the middle, I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do here. And so And it's broken down into 10 parts. And so what I love about that, then I'll go ahead and like write out scenes that will fit into each of these parts, which really helps me break the story down, and it makes it more clear in my mind. Because if I can understand what I'm writing, then I can just sit down and like just fly through my draft. I don't have to struggle. Because that's typically why I struggle when I pant, is because I start writing and I'm like, okay, I don't know what needs to happen next here. And I'm really not good with on the fly stuff. Like I need to know it beforehand. And so I'll do that. And then, like Angela does, I also, once I have all of that, then I will go ahead and break it down by chapter. You know, what's their motivation here? What are their goals? What are, you know, what are their obstacles here? Like, what is going to get in the way of the one thing that they want? I do that for every single part of the structure. Like, what's stopping them from achieving the thing, right? And then also, and then I like to think about stakes and also a clock. You know, you want to keep, especially for, because I write young adult fantasy, you have to keep it moving. You know, each page, like there has to be some type of tension, something that's like, you know, the world's about to blow up if they don't do this one thing, right? And so because of that, like I always think of the time clock. Like, you know, they literally only have 2 days to get to figure this out, or else everybody's gonna die. So that's typically like a huge overview of how I break it down for myself to knock out my stories. And because I do plot ahead of time, I am able to like binge write a long story in a very short amount of time, just because I know what I'm writing ahead of time versus like waiting till after.
I think that was a really phenomenal breakdown of it. I think for people who are new or struggle with any of those elements, I think that that's part of my problem for me when I'm writing, is that I don't give myself enough structure. So I'm kind of flailing around and trying to figure out what's going to happen. So that was great. Thank you. I have two questions that I'm going to ask you now, and I'm going to ask the first one so that you have a moment to think about it, because I know I am terrible on the fly with trying to remember everything. So I'm going to ask you the first question, let you have a moment to think about it while we're answering the second question. So Nancy wants to know, what books about learning and studying story structure can you recommend? So think about that for a second. And then Katrina has a fun question here. She says, is there some aspect you believe that some aspect of you that believes in magic that you're perhaps subconsciously weaving into your fantasy world? So I don't know if do you want to, Angela? Well, I think I have no idea whose turn it is to start first, so let's go back to Angela.
Yeah, so with magic, I think the kind of the underlying thing that I like to keep in my stories is that you never know what could happen, and also that anything is possible. And I kind of like that because that means there are no limitations. And even if the character thinks there are limitations and something happens, that something will happen that will totally shock them or throw them off or make them kind of reconsider their beliefs. And I think that that's a really cool thing to include in there. So that would be my kind of like underlying thing that I include in all my stories, at least where it's related to magic.
Do you have any recommendations yet, or do you want to think about it for a minute while we're going around?
I do have recommendations. I have a stack of books on my bookshelf, and so I would recommend books by Lisa Crone. There is Wired for Story, I think that's the name of it, and then Story Genius is another good one. I also highly recommend Bird by Bird.
Oh no, she froze. Did she freeze or did we freeze? Looks like she froze. Okay.
She froze. Oh no.
We will pick right back up there. I also love
Good
Bird by
breakdown.
Bird. Such a, oh, you're back. You froze for a second. The last thing we heard was Bird by Bird.
Right. So Bird by Bird. I don't know the name of the author. I can't see it from here, but if you just Google it, that you'll find it.
And
And then
Lamont.
I also like K.M. Weiland. She's also really good. Now her stuff is really intense for me. Like she has crafting character arcs, which really breaks it down. It's almost like a step-by-step guide. And it's almost too much for me, but I like it because it gives me ideals. And I don't follow her structure very closely, but I like kind of like the overall guidelines it gives me. Just because when I find that if I follow a structure too closely, my stories tend to get pretty dry. And so I really have to kind of keep that kind of that free spirit flow in there, but then kind of remember like, oh, let me just go back to my character's goal and make sure that, you know, they are changing throughout the story. They are coming to these realizations, and that creating character arcs really helps with that. And so those are my recommendations.
Awesome. Autumn, do you believe in magic?
Absolutely. I have a very Gaelic heritage, if you haven't guessed, so very Irish, Scottish background. And that really fits very well right now because I'm also writing a Fae story. So I've gotten to delve into that a lot more. But if you look at a lot of my pictures on social media, I'm holding a 4-leaf clover. I'm one of those people who can literally be walking through a field on a hike, and I will pick up probably 5 to 10 4-leaf clovers. And yeah, there's a little bit of fairy magic, I think, in my family's blood. My mom always knows what's going on in my life, so it's definitely on her side of the family because we can communicate. She drew a square once playing Pictionary, and I said corral, and we won the game. And, you know, we got that connection. So that is definitely, magic is real, and it's definitely in my blood, and it's also definitely in my books. I love putting in magic as well as I love rules of magic. I don't know why. I'm a very much a rebel at heart, but I love having strict rules for my magic. So you crank up the tension and things can happen or can't happen. I try not to break my rules. And as for recommendations, Angela already listed some fantastic ones. So a lot of those I would agree with. Stephen King's book on writing is, of course, like a go-to for everyone. And I'm going to cheat and say that I did just release this year Plot Development and Plot Development Step by Step, which are 2 workbooks. And I follow a totally different structure from everyone else. I use the 7 steps of story structure. And then I do try to tie that into world building and character arcs as well. I usually put the character development first and then the story structure. So doing it a little differently, no one else fit what Jesper and I decided we did and how we both ended up doing it together. So we wrote our own book and that's what we came up with. So I'd recommend that one too.
I think that's awesome. And yes, you absolutely can all promote your own stuff. And at the end, we'll make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to tell all about your stuff to everyone here. But I think that's one of the coolest things is that really, I mean, yes, there are some accepted rules to the game, but I mean, there's so much freedom to just do what works for you, right? And Stephanie, we know you believe in magic, but what else would you like to say on the topic?
I 7,000% believe in magic. It's funny because we were having a conversation with the family, and I was like, "You guys, there's no way we're the only ones here. Like, there's no way this is all that is. Like, there's way more. Like, if I can think it, there has to be something out there." Like, we were just having that discussion. So I definitely believe, that there's way more to what we know than what we see. And I'm like hoping for that one day where I can too be like, "I saw an angel." Like that's my goal in life, guys. But yeah, no, for sure. Just being raised in a home that believes in the supernatural, like that's definitely like a go-to for me, just knowing that one day I'll be able to have my chance of seeing something where everyone will be like, sure. But I know deep down within myself it's real. And as far as books, Autumn and Angela beat me to everything. Yeah, so I am definitely a Cam Weiland girl. She really, for a plotter like myself who really likes structure, outlining your novel, I think it's a 5 key characteristics of character arcs, I believe it is, structuring your novel. So outlining your novel and structuring your novel got me all the way together, especially in the beginning when I knew absolutely squat. Definitely On Writing by Stephen King. Like everyone should knock that out. Anatomy of Story. I do love that one. Forget the author. I apologize. But Anatomy of Story is a good one for me as well. I really do like that. And I will say an editing one, Angela and I on the Indie Author Lifestyle Show, we talked to Tiffany Yates Martin, and she released Intuitive Editing. Y'all, that book is good. You hear me? For editing, it is so good. I'm using it now. Like I'm using the principles of it now, and it really helps as far as like once you finish writing the thing. So I know we're mostly talking about like the actual drafting process or before it, but like afterwards, that one is super, super good. Yes, Nancy just asked. It is Intuitive Editing by Tiffany Yates Martin. She's really, really good. So I would suggest suggest those books for sure. You're welcome.
I love to hear somebody get so excited about editing a book on editing, because it's like, this is our world. We are into it. So, I think if nothing else, what people should take away from that is that you don't just plop down at your desk and write a 200, 300, 400, 500 page book without some work. Like not just writing work, but it's preparation, it's learning the skills, it's learning the structure, it's learning and absorbing as much as you can. And it sometimes surprises me how many authors I speak to who've never read a book in the genre that they're trying to write on, which I don't get. Like, I read everything I can possibly read in my genre. And this is a question I would actually just popped into my head, but I think would be a great one. So the other day I was talking to someone and she wants to write historical fiction like I do. And I was like, well, you really need to be reading all the books set in that time frame and set in particular in the country or the region that you're in. And she was like, well, I'm afraid to read any books about it because I'm afraid I'll incorporate their stories into mine. And I was like, I've never had that fear, but I'm curious, do other authors ever have that fear? And I'll just let whoever, if you've had it, you can speak up. From the expressions on your face, I'm not sure any of you ever have had that problem.
Well, I'll hop in on this one. So I've not experienced that fear, mainly because there's nothing new under the sun. There's not a single new idea that you will find. The thing that makes us different is our voice and our perspective and our own twists on it. And so I used to struggle with words, imposter syndrome, guys. I used to struggle with that a lot. I used to be like, oh dear God, I will never be like Cassandra Clare. Sarah J. Matt, she's like the queen, they say, of young adult fantasy. Well, then again, she has to like fight Cassandra Clare for that title. But, like I used to think about these, incredibly wildly popular authors in my genre, young adult epic fantasy. And I'd be like, oh, I could never, I need to write something unique and different. And, they're writing about Fae. What can I make up that's different? And I realized like, no, you don't need to come up with something completely new. Like there are thousands of books about dragons, and yet they are all different. There are thousands of books about Fae, vampires, werewolves. What's different is what the author was thinking, what problems they want to solve, their own twists in it, how they create the world, and what kind of characters they bring into life. And that's what makes it unique. And so I've never had that fear of I'm not going to read what is in my genre, because first of all, we just gave y'all like a list of books to read, but at the same time, reading books in your genre is also studying your craft. It's studying what you need to do. Like I would not be able to write a good young adult fantasy novel if I did not read other young adult fantasy novels, because that shows me structure. That shows me the tropes that readers expect. That shows me how to build my world, when to bring in characters, when things start happening, how the story keeps moving, and plot beats and story beats and all of that. And so I think that you do yourself a disservice when you want to write in a genre but you don't read in it or you don't study in it, because reading other people's works will actually help you become a better writer in that genre. So
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, and especially for fiction writers, I mean, there are so many things that you don't realize necessarily as a reader, like tropes, like those types of things, that until you're studying them. And I think either of you can hop in on this too, Angela and Autumn, but I think as you shift perspective when you start to write, and now you're not only reading for enjoyment, but you're reading as research as well. How do I do this? How do I write like this? I don't know if either of you want to hop on this particular topic, or we can move on to the next question. Autumn?
I would just concur with Stephanie. I think the only thing that ever bleeds through is sometimes the tone of a book. If I'm reading a lot of dark fantasy, I'll maybe pull in a darker tone, but the story and ideas, no matter what, when it comes into if you've developed your world, you've developed your characters, even if you get a little bit of inspiration, it's going to come out as something different. So I've never really been worried about reading and being inspired, because it's really what it comes down to is inspiration, not copying.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Angela?
Yeah, I would just to tap on, I would just say that reading can actually help inspire you. When I was having my writing drought and I couldn't finish my novel because I was so stuck with it, the thing that helped me move forward was reading other books. Like I was reading and then I was like, wait a second, I know. And the plot twist at the end of that book, it's phenomenal. And that's only because I was reading. And so I would say, if anything, reading will help you.
I agree. And, we've talked about this in our marketing interviews together, Angela, and we're not going to get into marketing today because we don't have enough time to cover that. But also reading other authors, reviewing other authors, talking about other authors' books, sharing other authors like that does your readers a service because you can't write books enough fast enough for them to read it. So, I mean, yeah, I like, let's do it. Let's read everything. Let's share everything. Let's promote everything, put good karma into the world. Okay, so it's interesting because Carolyn just asked a question that actually really piggybacks on something that on the next question I was going to ask. And that is, all three of you mentioned the importance of character development and really digging into your character for the development of the story. So I'd kind of like to talk about, for me, character development it's tough, like, because I see them. I know this character in my head. They live with me. They're part of me. Like I get them, but it's really hard for me to translate that onto the paper so that other people feel them the way that I feel them. So I'd kind of like to talk about that, and then mixing in Carolyn's question if you can. She's 73 years young and a wonderful woman. I would like to say she's a self-help author, but she wants to write a romantic fantasy. So she wants to know if any of you feel that if there's a successful market for older characters. So in talking about the character development and kind of answering Carolyn's question too. And I don't know, is anybody ready to go? Because I've lost count of who I should call on next. So feel free to unmute yourself and go wild.
Yeah.
Or freeze. Okay, Angela, we will come back to you if it doesn't unfreeze very quickly. We'll count to 5. Ready? 1, 2. I feel like a school teacher now. 3. But she's back. Okay, you were frozen for a hot second there. We were patiently awaiting you.
Okay, awesome. So I
This always happens in the best moments. This is like suspense. Okay, how about Stephanie, do you have anything to say? Angela, okay, she's back. Here we go. We'll try it again.
Okay, last time. Then y'all can move on. But no, I wanted to touch on the market for older characters first, just because I feel like there are a lot of books that are written for young adult, and there are a lot of books that are written for kind of like the new adult and people in their 20s. But one of the things that I always struggle with is finding more books that are written for characters that are my age or even older. And so I think there is a market for that and people are looking for them. And more recently, I have clients that I build websites for, and I'm starting to see that they are writing those kinds of books. So I definitely would say there's a market for them. And people are starting to write more of them because they're finding that gap and they're saying there are no books, about romance for people that are my age. They're all like the young people, and that's great. And I'm happy for them. But like, I do think there need to be, like we need someone who's older that's out there, doing all these things and being like, you know what, I got to protect my kids and my family, my grandkids. So I'm going to go do this. And I might fall in love along the way. And so I think those are exciting stories and definitely should write them. And then as for character development, this is one thing that it's really interesting. So going back to the book by Kay and Wyland, crafting or creating character arcs, I think that's a great place to start for figuring out how to even develop a character. And the things that I like to think about the character, not only what they look like, but also their background, because I feel like the background of a character really informs how they view the world and how they react in different situations. And so one of the ways of really studying characters and character development and character arcs is by going right back to reading, because reading is where you'll see, oh, okay, here's this character. They were born in this family. They had lots of siblings. Maybe they felt a little left out and they wanted to do something great, which led them off on this path. And then they became a villain, not because they didn't have a good heart, but because, they really wanted everyone to look at them. And that's kind of like their goal. And whether that's right or wrong, you can see, oh, okay, it was what happened during the beginning that kind of led them along this path. And so that's where I like to start. And then I like to think about the different traits that characters have. And I mean, you can look up a list of different traits of characters and see, like what makes them who they are. Maybe they're really fun and snarky. Maybe they try to keep people at a distance by always like cracking jokes. Maybe they're always warm and kind-hearted and always believe the best in people. And because they're so naive and innocent, that kind of leads them to some really bad situations just because they're always trying to be kind-hearted. So really thinking about characters from that point of view and what you can even pull in what makes them afraid. What is their greatest fear? What is their heart's desire? Maybe they just don't know what they want, and that also can help them be led astray or led into a situation where something good happens because they really don't know, but they're willing to take a chance. Maybe they're super curious. I also love going back to The Hobbit because that's a character where Bilbo Baggins, he just wants to be at home in his cozy little hobbit hole. Like that's what he really wants. But he also kind of has that curiosity that makes him decide, oh, I'm going to go off on this adventure. And then he's so sorry so many times. Then he went off on this adventure and he's like, I just want to get back home to my hobbit home and my tea and, my 13 different meals a day, just different things like that. And so I think reading will help, and then also kind of studying the character arcs and what helps a character begin. And I'm really good at character beginnings lore, but then also looking at what makes them change their heart and actually realize this is what I actually need. This is where I get my courage and my confidence, and this is the part where I need to rise up, or the part where I need to like step back. And I think one other thing that will really help with crafting characters is asking why and talking to people that don't have the exact same beliefs as you have. Because when you're writing, it really helps to have the different perspectives. But going to someone and like talking about their beliefs, or really reading from different perspectives and understanding why do they believe this way? What happened to make them think like this? And just keep asking why until you get to the root cause. And I think that will help you with crafting those characters.
That was a fantastic answer. I'm gonna go to Autumn next, or sorry, Stephanie. Stephanie's ready to go, so we'll go Stephanie.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome, especially the nugget about asking why. Because when you ask why, then you get to really the psyche behind, the reason, just the actions of characters. For me, when it comes to character development, it's really about trying to understand them from a humanistic perspective. You do not have Earth without us humans in it, and we are all very different, all 7.56 billion of us now. We're all very different. And so for me, I like to sit down. A lot of what I do, just gonna throw this out there for anybody that it might help. I do have a workbook called Creating Complex Characters. It's just making them relatable. And I ask very specific questions in there. And what I found is, because in the past I used to knock out all the stuff, right? What do they look like? How tall are they? How old are they? All of this nonsense. But then it's like, but you don't really know the character. And so I reached a place where I physically try to place myself in a position as if I'm speaking to this character over lunch, over dinner, over, a favorite beverage. And it's like, okay, let me understand who you are and why you do what you do. And a lot of that has to do with their backstory. A lot of that has to do with how they came about having the worldview that they have, and why do they think this certain way? Why do they make these decisions? And a lot of that taps into like, what secrets are you hiding? What are you running away from? What is a mistake that you had that you can't forgive yourself? What did you do to get yourself in the position that you are now? Why did you run away? Why do you live where you live now? You know, are you estranged with your family? Like, these kinds of questions really begin to unpack the character, because as human beings, we are multifaceted. Though we may be good and wholehearted, we also have like evil sides to us. We, you know, one split decision and you can decide, well, you know what, I forget all of you, we're all burning, right? And so, you know, it's like, what is that fine line between what gets you spiraling into making more negative decisions, or what gets you spiraling into wanting to become a better person? You know, and of course that taps into like character arcs and redemptive arcs and like good arcs, or like delusionment arcs and that kind of thing. But that's what I really tap into, is trying to get, and a lot of that happens with like journaling, with prompts, and just very specific questions that really help you to understand, why is this individual the way they are? And like Angela said, it's true, you know, like speaking to people that are different than you know, speaking to people that have a different mindset than you. Like if you speak to me, you're coming across an individual who was raised in a single parent home as an immigrant in a different country with a skin color that has been marginalized, right? And so like my worldview is very different than someone else who was raised in a two-parent home, everything was stable, they never moved. You know, like I went to multiple schools, you know, throughout my livelihood, whereas other kids, you know, they went to the same schools in their zones for their entire life. And so our worldviews are different, because my life was more unstable, so I had to learn to adapt to things quicker, whereas someone else who is maybe more raised in a stable home, you know, it's harder for them to face reality, so to speak, because they're not prepared for it, whereas kids like myself had to grow up really fast. And so when you think about these kinds of things and you're thinking about the character, right, you put them in this world, you put them in these circumstances where they have to either figure out a solution to the situation that they're in, to the problem that they have, or they do something that makes it infinitely worse. And each time that they try to make it better, it keeps getting worse, because their decisions, you know, they think they have good intentions, but they're making bad decisions. And so you end up with negative results. And so for me, that's what I try to do. I really try to think about human beings. You know, we try to have good intentions, we try to be good. And a lot of us, you know, when you think about protagonists versus antagonists, they're all the same. It's just the decisions that they make, right? Like a good villain isn't necessarily this person that just wants everything to burn all the time. It's that they want something so dear and personal to them, and the decisions that they make to get that harms and hinders everybody else around them. Whereas a protagonist, they want something really bad, and the decisions that they make helps everybody else around them. And so when you think about just, you know, human behavior, the way we act, you know, a mother with their child, a father protecting his daughter, you know, a girl who was raised in a strict home and just wants to please her parents and will do anything, you know, to get that approval. When you begin to think about the core of who we are as human beings, then it'll become easier for you to be able to develop this character and bring that to life on the pages.
That's such interesting. The whole time you were speaking, I was thinking, you know, it's such a shift of mindset for me, because I've always thought the storyline was first and the characters were second. But I think you've just completely changed my mindset on that, that it's actually characters first and that drives the story. So that's so cool. Autumn, what do you have to say on that topic?
Well, first I want to say I definitely think there is a split space for older fiction, older characters in fiction. I know that one of my favorite books is The Woodwife by Terry Windling. And it's not, when I first read it, must have been in my early 20s. And I think when I read it, you know, probably it was the third or fourth time, but when I read it later, there's a point where I realized that I was finally the same age as the main characters. I might have been 30s, early 40s, but it changed the story. And I think especially with romance, so many of the young books, it is love at first sight, these hot romances. And I am all for finding, you know, love is hard. I've been married for 20 years. It's really hard, but it's wonderful. And that type of love where it's simmering, where it's long term, I just think that is a beautiful romance, that there should be something deeper than those quick sparks. So I try to have both in my stories. In fact, I am pretty well known that if it was love at first sight, they often have to work through that later and get to know each other a lot better. So I think that is wonderful to write stories like that, because yeah, there are readers looking for that kind of experience, who want that kind of realistic. Love is a lot more complex and life is a lot more complex, especially when you come into it a lot older. Then for characters, so much perfect, everything else that's been said. That deep belief that often it comes from backstory, some traumatic event that happened to a character when they're younger, shapes our worldview, shapes your character's worldview. And then the plot, yeah, the plot is all about making that character break that deep belief because it's wrong. The way they're viewing the world is simply wrong, and they have to shatter that. And whatever that event is in the 7 steps of story structure, that's called the dark night of the soul or the new info, if it's not quite as dark. And that moment of shattering it changes the character art, flips the entire novel. It's the second turning point for the entire novel. And so, yes, the character comes first, just like you said, Alexa. It is so important to know what makes that character tick, what that deep belief was, what happened in this character's past to form it. Usually it's tragic, obviously, that is really that moment of backstory that shapes the entire character's life. And then designing a plot that makes them face that, breaks it, and transforms them into something else, which then transforms the plot. Or if they fail, or if they're coming into it as keeping that and they stay as a villain. I love really complex villains that are wonderful people, but they're making decisions that are just horrible and they affect everyone. They're doing it maybe to save people, but by saving their people, they're hurting so many others. And that's what makes these stories so complex. And complex fiction, complex fantasy is really what people are looking for right now. It is a very difficult world, very complex, gray world. And our fantasy is very much like that. Those days of thou art the chosen one and you have been born into it and you shall succeed because you were born. That went out in the 80s. So stories, reading was popular right now is so important because right now it is definitely those complex stories and knowing what really will break a character and transform them.
I love it. Y'all have so much to teach. We're going to have to organize a workshop, I believe, because there's so much to teach here and I want more. I want so much more. I've always kind of toyed with the idea of writing a fantasy book, but it's so intimidating to me. But just listening to the 3 of you today, I'm on fire. And now I don't know how I'm going to add this to my list of 72 other books I'm trying to write, but we're going to do it. So I hope y'all are down because we're going to have to do a workshop on this, but I want to wrap up with the question that I asked you at the beginning, which ironically, Janie just popped in here with that as well. And I'm sorry for the questions that we can't get to today. We're just running out of time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but stay tuned for the upcoming workshop that I'm scheduling for us. No, okay, so back to the original question, like, how do you make time to be, are you full-time writers? Janie asks, which I think all of you all are for full-time writers, correct? This is your either writing, marketing, or well, you can answer that question. And then, and how much time do you spend writing each week, and how do you devote enough time for all the things that come along with being an author outside of writing? It's a big question.
I'll go. I am not a full-time writer actually, and that was like a revelation in 2020 for me. Angela and I talked about that a while back, where I realized I like the idea of being a full-time writer, right? Where you wake up, we have author friends who they wake up and they write for 8 hours a day, every single day, 40 hours a week, and that's what they do. And I like the idea of that, but I am too multi-passionate to do that. I am also a graphic and web designer. I have dabbled in that. I have done that since I was like 12. So for me, my creativity is split between web design and also writing. However, writing is very much so a priority. I love design, but writing comes first. This is like my life's blood. I absolutely love it. I thrive off of it, and I have far too many stories to not do it. So for me, we get this question often, how do you get it done? If you're working full time, if you have kids, if you have a spouse, if you're a caregiver, if, you have all of these responsibilities on your plate, how do you get it done? time will not just magically show up. Let's just be real. Like, we can say, oh, when I have more time, when so and so is out of the house, or when I have a part-time job and I'm so taking care of things with something else, or when things are going much better, then I'll have the time. That will never happen. Like, I let the real Stephanie shine just a little bit. Like, I'm gonna burst your bubble. That's never gonna be a thing. Like, you will never have just extra time. Time will be there when you make time for time. That means that you need to schedule, like, you literally need to go in your calendar and schedule, this is my writing time. If you have kids and they wake up at 6, maybe your sacrifice is that you wake up at 5. If your time with your husband or your wife is between 8 and 9, maybe you skip Netflix at night and you start writing from 11 to 12 and you get it done. Like, I knew authors, they had like 3-4 kids and they had, dinner with the family, everybody comes together. And so their writing time was literally 11 at night till 2 in the morning. And mind you, they had to wake up at like 5 or 6 the next day. And so it all comes down to, how bad do you want it? Like, how serious are you about wanting to write a book? If you're definitely like, okay, no, I'm going to do this, then you will make it happen, right? Like, we have time for what we want to do, just like everybody has money for what they want to buy, right? And so I would say that if you need time, sit down and analyze what you do throughout your day. You might realize that you're losing 2-3 hours on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and that might be what you need to cut out so that that can turn into your writing time. And just being very clear, especially for those who have families, to sit down and say, look, during this block of time, it's mommy's writing time. I'm going to be in this little corner. Please do not disturb me for X amount of time. This is mommy's dream. This is daddy's dream. They're working very hard towards it. Love me and let me write. Okay, or if it's after everybody's asleep or before everybody wakes up again, you will only have time if you make time for it. So I really would encourage you to analyze your day, see when you can fit, and it doesn't have to be 3 hours, it can be 30 minutes every other day, like whatever you're actually able to do. Look at that and say, okay, you know what, I can commit to 30 minutes every, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I can commit. I actually have 2 hours. Wow, would you look at that? I have 2 hours that I can commit Monday through Friday. And every day between the hours of 7 to 9, Monday through Friday, I am writing. I'm not checking my phone. I'm not scrolling through social media. I'm not, discussing what was on the news with my spouse. I am sitting down, I am making my muse show up, and I am writing. So that is my advice when it comes to having time.
You know what? That's excellent advice. And my feed is over here blowing up because my team is like, whoop, like and Sarah just said that basically the message you just said was that as women, we need to give ourselves permission to put ourselves first for at least an hour a freaking day. And that's such an important message. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that as well. Okay, Autumn.
Yes, and that's where I was gonna start, is putting ourselves first, because my writing time, it used to be at the end of the day, and yeah, you cook, you take care of the dog, you do laundry, all of that other stuff, and by the time you get to you don't have the energy left, you don't have the creativity. So I've started flipping that. And even though I am full-time my own business, I'm a full-time entrepreneur, but I am also a graphic artist. I'm doing book covers, I'm a writing coach, so I've got courses and students and things like that. So as much as I'm writing, it is easy for that to just poof, gone. I'm busier now than when I was working full-time, coming home and tell my husband to get out of my way, I'm writing. And I would write for 45 minutes to an hour and a half a day, and I still managed to get 4.5 books out when I was working full-time. And now I was actually struggling. And so now I get up in the morning, and that is my writing time before I get to my clients, before I get to my emails, before I look at the new Photoshop course I just bought and I'm desperate to get into. Put all of that aside and I write first, and I plot first, and I stick to my own schedule. I had to shift everything. I was behind in my own writing deadline, and that is one of the big things. Give yourself deadlines. Tell yourself you have a goal and try to stick to it. So I try to write at least 1,000 words a day, which is absolutely actually really small for a full-time writer. And I realized I was behind, so I had to up it to a full chapter, which is 2,300. Some of my chapters were long. They were like 3,000 words. And I put that first, and I didn't care if it took to 11. If I was behind in my other clients, I just told them, this is what I have. I have 2 weeks to get back on my track. And I put myself first, and it actually felt awesome. Women, we can do it. It is so important to put yourself first, put your dreams first, put your writing first. But definitely find time, make it sacred. You're worth it. Your dreams are worth it. A half an hour, it'd be 15 minutes is a little short because to get in the mindset, to get it flowing, but keep it going every day and find time for it, because you will get there if you just, even if it's 500 words, just write. I used to have busy days and night meetings, and if I wrote a sentence that day, it was a win. And I would just keep a weekly writing goal of so many chapters. And I got there and I got here. And so you can too.
I love it. It's a really important message. And I know to that point, like when I started writing my first book, I was really driven to get it done because of the topic and that I wanted to help other grieving mothers. But I had 3 babies, 5, 2, and 0 at that time when I started blogging and writing about it. So same thing, I would get up at 5 a.m. and write from 5 till 6 or 6:15 when the first one of them got up. And then after they went to bed, I'd write for hours, and it was painful and I hated it, but I loved it too, because I was moving forward to that target. So you just have to say, this is as important as anything else in my life if I want this to happen, or you'll be forever haunted by those characters in your head. All right, Angela.
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic. This is like, I've been married for a year now, and this year I've published 9 books, although 5 of those were like short stories and they were less than like 30,000 words. But still, like, this has been my most productive year ever. And I really think it's because of my schedule and the structure of it. Like when I was single, I had so much time on my hands. I could do whatever. I could stay up late. I just like go partying, just like all this time. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I actually have a good writing schedule now, all of a sudden. But I really think it's, like everyone else said, giving yourself permission and knowing that, I can carve out this time to write. And, I can't remember the last time I watched Netflix. Just because I really don't watch that many shows anymore, just because I would rather do something I really enjoy, and that is writing. And I'm not a full-time writer at all. I do a lot of contract work. I do websites, but websites for authors. And then Stephanie and I host the Indie Author Lifestyle podcast and everything else that goes with it. And so there's always a lot going on, and I really enjoy that. But I think that helps me because instead of spending all my time like writing and trying to figure out the story, I feel like I'm sharper when I have a limited amount of time. And so I tend to spend between 5 to 10 hours a week writing. And one of the things that really helps with it is that because I do that, had so many years to practice, is that when I sit down to write, it takes me on average probably about an hour to write out 1,500 to 2,000 words. And so, especially if I know what's going on, like I can just fly through it and it goes so fast. And so I don't need tons and tons of hours to sit down and write. I think if you're a beginning author, you will need more time because you're kind of still getting used to it and you haven't put in the practice yet. But as you kind of get more seasoned and more used to it, and you understand yourself and the way you write and what your writing needs are, then I think it will help you to become a faster writer. And like I'm not one of those kinds of people that tries to push for 5,000 or 10,000 words a day, just because I know myself and I know that those words aren't going to be epic. They aren't going to be awesome. And I'm going to end up doing a lot of time rewriting if I try to push out those many words in a day. Everyone's a little bit different, but I think one of the things that really helped me with time management was in 2015 when I was freelancing and I was kind of trying to figure out, how do I schedule my clients? I read a book called Getting Things Done. And it is pretty old, but that really helped me with like the mindset and really get into the mindset and understanding, okay, like I need to be very goal oriented. I need to look at my projects and then work backwards and break them down into tiny chunks. And so the reason I publish a lot of books this year is just because I do have goals and deadlines. Usually what works for me is setting up a pre-order and then booking an editor. And then once I do those two things, I know I will sit down and I will make that story happen no matter what. And also looking back at the pre-orders and being like, oh my gosh, this book has so many pre-orders. I need to get to work. Just like that, those are the external motivators that really help me. And then I also have a place in my house. I have my library, and that's where I sit and I write and I get it done. And then I have 2 nights a week where me and my husband, we could just kind of do our own things. And those are my writing evenings where, I don't always like get a ton written, but, I can sit down and I can devote that time to writing. And that's, that's it. And so it really is having that schedule, giving yourself permission, and you don't need a ton of time. Like, I do 5 to 10 hours a week, and that's all I need. But it's knowing yourself and really knowing that, this is when I'm going to have that time and I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make it happen no matter what.
Oh my gosh, y'all are all three amazing women, epic business women here. And I think, everybody should take that from this as well, is that they're not just that. I think the dream of being a full-time author it's hard to achieve for a lot of different reasons. But, and for some of you, it was because you don't want to just be writing all the time, which is great. But also, it does take time and books and a lot of energy to get to a place where you can comfortably just be a full-time author as well. And I think so many of us are running side businesses that support our author business, but are also in line with what we do: marketing, websites, graphic design, all that, to help other authors. So first of all, I want to let everybody know that I'm going to have these ladies send all their links to their places, to the work that they do, to the way they help authors, to their books, etc. So we'll make sure that's on the Women in Publishing Summit website, womeninpublishingsummit.com. It'll be there. It'll be on our YouTube channel, which is actually Write, Publish, Sell, because that's our mama company. And it will be on every place, the replay, and all of those places that we send it out. So I appreciate so much you all being here. You've, just shared so much incredible knowledge. And I'm very serious about setting up some type of a workshop to maybe dig into the craft, because we have a lot more questions that people want answered. And I think that would be a really, really fun thing to do. And just really quickly, if y'all want to give your website or the best place for people to find you so that they can go ahead and start following you and getting all the things. Angela?
Yeah, so I have two. My author website is angelajford.com, and that's really the hub for all of my books. Or you can also reach me at indieauthorlifestyle.com, and that's where the podcast, blog, and all of the author geared resources are.
Awesome. Autumn?
Yes, so my author website is autumnwriting.com, and you can find all my books and everything there, including the nonfiction. And my website for authors with resources, courses, our podcast is at amwritingfantasy.com.
Cool. And Stephanie?
Yeah, so for me, everything for both writers and readers is at stephaniebwabwa.com. And then, like Angela mentioned before, everything for indies, for writing, marketing, and publishing is at indieauthorlifestyle.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I'm really inspired. So thank you. Have a great day, everyone.